Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 4K of the 1987 comedy classic Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Now, before I go any further sharing my thoughts on this 4K, I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Hope you've had a wonderful Thanksgiving today. And for those of you who are watching this post Thanksgiving, I also want to wish you a great rest of your day, week, and year. And I wish I could sit here and say that this is a great release, but it's not. It's not a great release of this film, but I also feel it's not as bad as a lot of other people have made it out to be. There are a lot of reviews of this release online that were posted last year when this came out in 2022 that were very harsh and very critical on this release. Going as far to say that it's a complete botched mess, that it's a DNR heavy, everybody looks like wax, so on and so forth. And there are some instances of DNR. There are some instances where the transfer was definitely, let's just say, maybe airbrushed a little bit or had some post processing done that definitely made things look a little bit waxy or smooth in some shots. But it's not an unwatchable disaster like some people have made this release out to be. And normally I don't do a lot of videos like this because I'd rather just review the film, but I already did a review of this film years ago. It's on my channel. You can just look it up and check it out for yourself. And I felt like I honestly said everything that I wanted to say in that video, and I feel the same way about this film that I did when I recorded that review, like 7 or 8 or maybe even 9 years ago. Like, I still love this film. I think it's still just as funny, just as heartfelt, just as tremendous as it was the first time that I saw it. It's one of my personal favorites. And it's a film that I watch like every Thanksgiving. It always provides the right amount of laughs and the right amount of heart, which is just the perfect pairing for this holiday. And honestly, for any day, like, this isn't a movie that's only good or only a fun watch when it comes to like watching it on Thanksgiving. Like, this film is great no matter when you decide to put it on because of the trio of John Hughes, John Candy, and Steve Martin. The three of them are just a absolute dynamic a group. Like, they just play off each other so well. And I always felt that Hughes' script was really good. It had a lot of variety. It had some twists in it that you might not necessarily have seen coming right away. There's a lot of very relatable, funny, humorous moments, and there's a lot of drama that actually does weigh things down, but in a good way. Like, it adds some extra weight to the shenanigans and the comic scenes in the film, where it's not just all goofiness and just road trip shenanigans. Like, there's something more to that. It makes the film resonate on an even deeper level. But it's a film that's never really looked that great on home video. I noticed that a lot of people's reviews of this 4K, they they completely missed that fact. They didn't have the right context. It's like one of those things where they maybe thought that it looked better on Blu-ray or it looked better on DVD than it did in 4K because the 4K was such a bad job. But that's really not the case. The film always looked rough on VHS, Laserdisc, DVD, and even Blu-ray. Like, the first Blu-ray was pretty. I wouldn't say poor, but compared to a lot of other Blu-ray transfers from around the same time period, it definitely left a lot to be desired. So I think a lot of what's going on with this film is that the print itself or the transfer that is being utilized for these releases, the only one that's left maybe wasn't in the best shape. Maybe they weren't able to actually remaster it directly from a print. Maybe they had to use a negative or something, or a master or some sort of thing. And so what it leads to is a lot of touching up and a lot of just sort of messing around with a older transfer and upscaling it. And when that happens, you get what you get with this 4K. But just because there's a few rough looking shots, just because there's a few shots where you can see what looks to be like some heavy DNR that's applied a little too much, this is not an unwatchable train wreck of a 4K. The film still looks fine. It just doesn't look amazing, but that's just par for the course when it comes to this movie on physical media. It just says it looked fine for a good chunk of its existence on home video. I'm wondering if it just looked kind of the same when it was released in theaters and 35 millimeter prints, because it just isn't a film that has ever looked like unbelievably amazing in terms of the way that it was shot, let alone the way that things were set up by the cinematography. It's just one of those movies where it's not a visual feast, so to speak. It never really has been that kind of thing. So the uptick in resolution and the addition of Dolby Vision and so on, it helps certain colors pop. It helps certain aspects of the film stand out more in terms of little details in the background or so on. And it does make some scenes really come across crystal clear. But because of the fact that kind of a rough looking film, because of the higher resolution, the rough edges and the rough spots in the movie when it comes to the transfer look even rougher. I will admit that. There are some shots where you're like, ooh, that didn't look that great. But then again, the same shots on DVD or Blu ray didn't look that great either. So it's one of those things where I think some people are ignoring what Paramount and what the people involved with this release had to work with. They weren't working with the best possible print or the best possible transfer. And in fact, I think they were just using the same transfer from the most recent Blu-ray, and they just upscaled that to 4K. And I can understand why some people are disappointed or a little upset because of that, but I don't think there really was an opportunity to go from the original print and use that, because it seems like that's not really something that was available to the studio, because Paramount's done some really good remasters lately, and I think if they had the opportunity or they had access to a really good print of the film, I think they probably would have used it. They would have used a negative, uh, um, if that's the right word that I'm supposed to utilize. I know other people who do these videos, they know all the terminology. I'm kind of a newbie on that, so forgive me. But from what I've seen with my OLED TV and with paired with the Oppo 203 4K player, the end result of the transfer of this 4K, it's serviceable. It's fine. It's watchable. It really is. It's not unwatchable garbage. It isn't. In fact, I think it's the best the film's looked on home video, but that's not saying a lot because it didn't look great to begin with from my eyes and in my personal opinion. Um but I could see why some people are disappointed because they expected something considerably better because of the format and because they're big fans of the film. They wanted to see a transfer that was significantly better, that topped any of the other transfers by a mile, but that's just not the case here in terms of what was ultimately delivered. And I feel that some of the claims about the waxiness are really just due to the fact that Steve Martin in this film, he wore a lot of heavy makeup. You can really tell that when you see it in 4K. And at this time period, there were certain films and certain actors they caked on the makeup. Like it just that's just kind of what happened. And so with the uptick in resolution, and it's something that just makes it even more obvious because you look at certain scenes with John Candy that are from the same sequence, and it doesn't look as waxy. So I don't really understand how whoever is doing the remaster, whoever's working on the 4K, would just make Steve Martin look waxy, but then John Candy in the same scene would look fine. So that doesn't make any sense to me that they would apply selective DNR to Steve Martin, but not to John Candy. So I think that is an incredible overstatement by certain critics when it comes to this release. Also, some of the lighting is just not the best. There are certain scenes in this film where John Hughes is just utilizing lighting that is in the hotel room. And as a result, it's kind of inconsistent when it comes to the lighting. And that's going to become something that's even more obvious and glaring when you see it in 4K. But there are some nice looking shots. There are some great shots in this. There are some moments where the transfer looks really good and considerably better than any of the other transfers previously, but it still has a similar amount of inconsistencies as the other transfers. But I don't know how much of it is really due to the transfer itself and how much of it is just due to the way that the film looks. When it comes to the lighting, when it comes to the way that it was directed, um, there are certain scenes that look kind of dark, but from my recollection, even from the digital print that I saw in a theater years ago, it kind of looked similar, even in the theater. So yeah, not the most sparkling, sterling, spectacular transfer, but it's not anywhere near as much of a disaster as some people make it out to be. And the audio mix, I think it's the same audio mix that was utilized in the previous Blu-ray. So you're not getting Dolby Atmos, for instance, if I remember correctly. You're just getting DTS HD master audio, and even with that, it still sounds really good. I think it sounds really clear. It's got some good usage of the surrounds in some spots. The dialogue is not something that's overwhelmed by the other parts of the sound mix. And when it comes to special features, that's where this release becomes a must own if you're a fan of this film, because of the fact that you have this special Blu-ray that only comes with this release that has over an hour of deleted scenes that were uncovered from the vaults of John Hughes. So for fans of John Candy, for fans of Steve Martin, for fans of John Hughes, for fans of this film, it's a treasure trove. It really is. It's over an hour of deleted scenes and different alternate takes, and that's a lot of fun. And that makes this release definitely worth picking up just for that alone, if you can find it for a good price. The other features, though, they're just legacy features that are ported over from the previous releases. Some featurettes, uh, some little things here and there. Like there was this making of, but half of it is just press interviews with John Hughes, John Candy, and Steve Martin, which were shot before the film's release, and those are still fun to see and still fun to hear the three of them talk about the movie. But understandably, you can't get new interviews. Well, I mean, you could have, but I guess Steve Martin just didn't want to do it. I guess. I couldn't get one for John because he was no longer around by the time they shot the supplemental features for Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Uh, but you had a few other like bit part cast members that were interviewed for little clips that were thrown in there. You had a tribute to John Candy, but it was only like 5 minutes, so it was very short. It felt like it was just an outtake from the documentary that they just released separately. There's another bit where they talk about John Hughes and how he's making films for adults this time instead of for teenagers, and that's another outtake of sorts. It seemed like they took a documentary that was like 30 minutes and then split it up into multiple little parts for whatever reason. I don't know why. The meat of the special features is a documentary about John Hughes, which is really good. I will admit that the documentary that they ported over from the previous release that is almost an hour that talks about John Hughes and has interviews with various different people who worked with John on various different films. That was a good watch. But the only new thing you get with this release is the over an hour of bonus feet of deleted scenes, and like it's a audition tape for the guy who played Owen. So there's not a ton, but the hour and 15 minutes of deleted scenes, that's that's a pretty good get. But yeah, it's definitely not the most spectacular, amazing, great 4K release. I wouldn't say that it's really on par with the quality of the overall film. The film itself is better than the release, but it's still worth picking up if you're a fan of the film and you have a 4K TV. You have a pretty nice high end player. You have a good setup. I think the larger the screen, the more obvious some of the rougher scenes are going to be. But that's the case with any of the other previous releases of this film. That's the case with the DVD. That's the case with the Blu-ray, both Blu-rays, especially the first Blu-ray release. The second Blu-ray release looked a little bit better, but I don't agree that the 4K looks worse than the Blu-ray. I don't agree with that at all. I know I have a smaller OLED. Mine is only 48 inches. It's not larger because I just don't have space for that. But I thought it still looked pretty good, pretty decent. Not great, but good enough for this comedy that kind of had this sort of rough look to it to begin with. But it's definitely not a rough watch. Definitely not a hard film to sit through. Uh, with this transfer, I think it's serviceable enough, and it's not nearly as distracting as some people make it out to be. I don't think you're going to watch this 4K if you're a fan of this film, and you're going to want to immediately shut it off because it's unwatchable. I think that's a complete and total over exaggeration, but it's still compared to some other releases that Paramount has done for their classic films in 4K, it is still a little bit of a letdown because of the fact that the transfer isn't an A plus transfer or even an A transfer. It's more of like a C, or yeah, it's more of a C transfer. It's just average because I think a lot of it was genuinely an upscale. And so when you get into that situation where you're just upscaling like a 2K remaster that's already been done and you're upscaling it to 4K and you're adding in extra processing, then it can make some things look a little too baked or makes things just look a little off. So I think that's what you get with this. But I still think it's like a B minus release overall for me, and that's because of the extra disc with the hour and 15 minutes of deleted scenes. Because that's the first time that anyone's ever seen them. So Paramount actually went the extra mile and found those scenes and put them out on this release. So that is why this is, it's still a B minus because yeah, the transfer is a C. The legacy features, it was nice to see them carried over, but they weren't the best to begin with in terms of their uh their content. They were just kind of there, other than the John Hughes documentary. But the hour and 15 minutes of deleted scenes, that's what makes it at least a B minus. And yeah, it's a release that if it's on sale for like $9.99, grab it. I wouldn't pay full price for it. If you can find a good deal on a used copy, that's what I did. I found a good deal on a used copy online. I would definitely get it that way. When it comes to the packaging, I guess that's one last thing I could talk about to round out this review. It's not great, but I think it still looks better than the other Blu-ray releases where they made it look like a Christmas movie, or they used even worse Photoshop. Um, I wish they could just use the original theatrical poster, to be honest, or some new artwork. But it is what it is. At least it they didn't completely butcher the cover art like some of the other releases of this film, or other releases that I've seen of other films in terms of the 4Ks or just home video releases in general. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the 4K of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And till next time, I'll see you later. See ya.